The cashier's name was Donna. I know that because I had been banking at that branch on Riverside Drive for 9 years, and Donna had been there for most of them. A woman in her early 50s, with reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain around her neck, and a way of greeting customers by name that made an ordinary Monday morning errand feel less like a transaction and more like a brief visit with someone who was genuinely glad to see you. She knew my coffee order was black, which I had mentioned exactly once, 3 years prior. She had remembered. On the morning of a Tuesday in November, I walked through the glass doors of Heartland Savings Bank on Riverside Drive in Dayton, Ohio, at 9:40 in the morning, approached her window, and asked to withdraw $4,000 from my personal checking account. Donna smiled. She typed. She leaned slightly toward the screen, and then something changed. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind of change that announces itself. The kind of change that a person notices only if they have spent decades watching people receive information and learning to read the half-second before they respond to it. She looked at the screen a moment too long. Her hands went still above the keyboard. She looked up at me, and her expression was doing something careful, something managed. She said, "Mr. Gallagher, could you give me just a moment?" She picked up the phone. She turned her body a quarter turn away from the window. She spoke in a voice I could not fully make out. She set the phone down and looked back at me and said, "Our branch manager would like to speak with you, if you don't mind. He'll be right out." I looked at her. I said, "Donna, what's happened?" She said, "Mr. Gallagher, let me have Kevin come out. He can explain everything better than I can. Just one moment." She said my name once, then looked back at her screen. That is the thing a person does when they have been told what to say but haven't been told how to say it and are doing their best. I have spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. I know what it looks like when someone is managing information toward a conversation rather than away from one. I stepped to the side. I waited. The lobby of the Riverside Drive branch was doing its ordinary Tuesday morning business. An older couple at the far window, a young woman in scrubs at the ATM near the entrance, a delivery driver dropping off something at the side desk. The ordinary mechanics of an ordinary morning in a city that does not ask for drama and does not usually receive it. 40 seconds later, a door to my right opened, and a man in his mid-40s in a gray suit and a Heartland Savings lanyard walked toward me with the expression of someone who has received a specific phone call and prepared a specific face for the conversation that follows. He extended his hand. He said, "Mr. Gallagher, I'm Kevin Marsh, branch manager. Would you come with me for a minute?" I said, "Of course." I followed him down a short hallway to a corner office with a laminate desk and 2 chairs and a window that looked out on the parking lot and the brown November sky above it. He closed the door. He sat down. He turned his monitor toward me with the deliberate care of a man who has decided the exact pace at which he is going to deliver what he is about to say. He said, "Mr. Gallagher, I want to show you something. This morning at 8:14, someone entered this branch and made a cash withdrawal from your personal checking account. The full available balance. $26,840. He let that land. Then he said, "The withdrawal was made with a signed authorization slip. Mr. Gallagher, our fraud protocols flagged the transaction before full clearance. The funds are currently frozen. But I want you to see what our lobby camera recorded this morning at 8:14. He clicked the mouse. The monitor showed a security feed from above the teller windows, time-stamped 8 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds in the upper corner. The image was sharp. It was a newer system, installed the previous spring, higher resolution than the old one. The person at the window was a man. Tall, late 30s. Blue canvas jacket I recognized immediately because I had given it to him 2 Christmases ago. I had ordered it from a catalog. I had written his name on the tag inside the box. It was my son. My younger son, Mitchell. I looked at that image for a long time. Kevin Marsh, to his credit, sat quietly and did not move and did not speak, and gave me the silence the moment required. I said, quietly, "That is my son, Mitchell Gallagher." He said, "Yes, sir." Not, "That is what we believed based on the account name and the ID he presented." I said, "He is not authorized to make withdrawals from this account." Kevin said, "The account is in your name only, Mr. Gallagher. The authorization slip bears what appears to be a forged signature. Given the frozen status of the funds, nothing has cleared. The money is recoverable, but I'd strongly recommend filing a police report today so our fraud team can begin the formal process." I said, "I need a copy of the transaction record, the authorization slip, and a still from that footage." He said, We'll have everything ready within the hour, I said. Thank you, Kevin. I sat back. I looked at the frozen image on that monitor. My son in his blue Christmas jacket at my bank at 8:14 in the morning while I was at home eating oatmeal and listening to the radio. But here is what Mitchell did not know when he walked through those doors on a Tuesday morning in November. Here is the part that changes every part of what comes after it. The $26,840 in that Heartland savings account was not my primary wealth. It was the amount I had deliberately moved there 6 weeks earlier. It was, in the most exact sense of the phrase, the amount I had decided I was willing for him to try to take. Because I had known, for 6 weeks, that he was going to try to take something, and I had spent those 6 weeks making sure that what he found would be what I chose to leave, and that nothing else would be reachable. My name is Raymond Gallagher. I am 64 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and the education that brought me to that chair in Kevin Marsh's office on a Tuesday in November cost me 31 years of professional discipline. One February morning when I found something in my own records I was not looking for, and the specific kind of clarity that comes to a man who has spent his entire career following numbers that other people believed were hidden. Mitchell made the mistake that everyone who tries to steal from a forensic accountant eventually makes. He assumed that because I was older and retired and living alone, I had stopped paying attention. I was born paying attention. Welcome to the story. My name is Raymond, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened. Hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I read every one of them. Let's get into it. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, the last 14 of those as a senior investigator with a firm based in Columbus that contracted primarily with insurance companies and legal teams handling fraud cases. The work was not glamorous. It was patient and methodical, and involved sitting with very large amounts of data for very long periods of time until the data told you what it was hiding, which it always did, eventually, if you were willing to look long enough, and without the filter of what you wanted it to say. Numbers do not care what you want. This is the thing that most people misunderstand about financial fraud. The fraudsters are almost never stupid. They are almost always impatient. They build something that looks correct from the front and count on no one looking at the back, and the back is always where the record is. I retired in 2022 at the age of 62, a year after my wife Helen died. Helen Marie Gallagher, born Helen Marie Novak in Findlay, Ohio, in 1959, was a reading specialist for the Dayton public school system for 24 years. She believed, with the conviction of someone who had tested the belief against evidence for decades, that every child who struggled to read was hiding a reader inside them, and that the job was to find the door, not to conclude there wasn't one. She brought the same quality to people generally, which made her both exceptional at her work and occasionally too generous with people who did not deserve it. She saw the best version of everyone and held that version out to them like a thing they had mislaid and could still retrieve. I loved this about her, and it also, on several occasions over the years, caused me to let things go longer than I should have because Helen believed they would resolve. She died of pancreatic cancer in March of 2021. She was 61 years old. The illness was diagnosed in December and she was gone by March, which is not enough time to learn how to lose someone, and not enough time to say everything that should be said. And I will not go further into those months because they are mine, and because this story requires different things from me than that. What is relevant is this. Helen died in March of 2021. By that August, 5 months later, my younger son Mitchell had asked me 4 times about the status of my retirement accounts. I had 2 sons. Daniel was 41 and lived in Cincinnati, where he worked as a high school football coach and called me every Sunday without fail, and had driven to Dayton 3 times in the months after Helen died without being asked, and who had once, quietly, on a Sunday call in the autumn of 2021, said to me, "Dad, I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should pay attention to how Mitch is talking about your finances. He asked me about your pension last week." I had heard Daniel. I had not moved quickly enough on what I heard. Mitchell Gallagher was 38 years old. He lived in Beaver Creek, about 15 minutes east of my house, with his girlfriend Tara, who had her own 2 children from a previous marriage, and who had always seemed to me to be a person under significant pressure from several directions at once. Mitchell had worked a string of sales positions since his mid-20s, each of them ending for reasons that were, in his telling, always someone else's fault. He was charming in the way that people are charming, when charm is the primary tool they have learned to use, and he had always been easy to be with at a surface level, and harder to trust the further below that surface you looked. Helen had believed he would find his footing. She had believed it sincerely and advocated for it consistently. And I had deferred to that belief more times than was probably wise, because she was usually right about people, and because he was my son, and I loved him in the complicated way. You love a child who has disappointed you repeatedly, and whom you keep extending the benefit of a doubt that you are no longer certain is warranted. The estate questions began in August. They were framed carefully. He mentioned a friend whose father had died without a clear beneficiary structure and the legal costs the family had incurred. He mentioned that Tara had a cousin who worked in financial services who might be able to review my accounts at no charge, just to make sure everything was properly organized. He mentioned once, driving back from a lunch we had in October, that the house on Millbrook Avenue was probably worth significantly more than it had been when I bought it, and had I given any thought to what I intended to do with it. The house on Millbrook Avenue. I noted every one of those conversations in a small spiral notebook I kept in the desk drawer in my home office, dated and summarized. The way I had noted significant conversations throughout my professional career, because documentation is not a reflex I turn off when I leave the office, it is the way I think. By January of the following year, Mitchell was also asking about helping me get organized, digitally. He said he worried about me managing everything online alone. He said his friend had helped set up automatic bill pay for his own parents and they had found it transformative. He asked if he could come over one afternoon and help me set up a system. If I would just write down my login information so he could configure things properly before he came. I told him I had managed online banking and digital accounts for 14 years and was confident in my ability to continue to do so. He said he just wanted to help. I said I appreciated that. I noted the date and the conversation in my notebook. In February, I came home from a hardware store run to find Mitchell in my home office. He had a reason. He was looking for a tool he remembered from when he was a teenager and thought might still be in the closet. That was plausible. I had tools in that closet. But when I walked into the office, Mitchell was at the desk rather than at the closet. And he stood up faster than he needed to, and his hand moved away from the keyboard of my laptop in a way that a person moves their hand away from something when they have been using it and have just heard the front door. I did not say anything in that moment. I said nothing, and I watched his face arrange itself, and I went and found the tool he was looking for in the closet, and handed it to him and walked him out. After he left, I sat down at that desk. I spent the following week doing what I had spent 31 years doing professionally, which is looking at every record I had access to with complete attention and no preference for what I found. I found two things. The first was that my Heartland Savings checking account had been accessed online from an IP address registered to a Beaver Creek, Ohio internet service provider at 11:52 on a night in January. The session lasted 6 minutes. No transactions were completed. But someone had been in my account, someone who knew my login credentials, someone who lived in Beaver Creek. The second thing I found was a credit inquiry on my report that I had not initiated. An application for a personal loan submitted in my name through an online lender in January, 4 days after the account access. The application had been declined because I had maintained a credit freeze for years, a professional habit I had never dropped after retiring, because the cases I had spent my career working had made me permanently alert to how quickly a person's identity could be used against them. But the inquiry was there. January. While Mitchell was asking if he could come over and help me get organized, I sat at that desk for a long time with those two findings in front of me. I am a forensic accountant. I know what an anomaly is, and I know what it means when two anomalies share a geographic origin and a timeline. I had been filing this pattern in the place where you file things you are not ready to name because naming them has consequences you are not yet prepared for. I was ready to name it. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Carol Weston. She was 60 years old and had a practice on Brown Street in Dayton handling estate law and elder financial abuse cases. Her office was on the second floor above a framing shop, which tells you something about the kind of practice it is. It was not a glass tower operation. It was a working office with file boxes and a potted plant that had been there long enough to have outgrown its original pot, and a paralegal named Marcus who ran the intake process with the efficiency of someone who has seen a great many situations and has stopped being surprised by any of the cities. Them. Carol Weston reviewed my notebook and my printed findings without comment. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me directly. She said, "Mr. Gallagher, based on what you have documented, Do you believe your son intends to attempt to access your assets? I said, I believe he is in the process of doing so already. The credit inquiry and the account access are not coincidences. They are reconnaissance, she said. And your other son? I said, Daniel warned me. He is not involved in what Mitchell is doing. I am certain of that. She said, what outcome do you want? I said, I want my estate to go where I decide it goes. I want Mitchell to find that I was already ahead of him before he got far enough to do real damage. And I want a complete record. Because without a record you have a story, and with a record you have a case. And I have spent my career understanding the difference. Carol looked at me for a moment. Then she said, those are achievable. Let's talk about how. What Carol recommended, and what I executed over the following 6 weeks, was this. I updated my estate documents, which had not been fully revised since Helen's death. I established a revocable living trust, the Raymond and Helen Gallagher Family Trust, naming Daniel as successor trustee and primary beneficiary of the residential property. I transferred the Millbrook Avenue house into the trust. I opened a new primary savings account at a different institution, Third Federal on Far Hills Avenue, under the trust structure, and moved my liquid assets there. I left the Heartland Savings checking account on Riverside Drive open. I left it with a balance of $26,840. The reason I left it open was the same reason a hunter leaves a path clear. Mitchell had my login credentials and had been watching that account. If I closed it or drained it, he would know something had shifted. If I left it open with a balance that looked like my usual operating funds, he would see the number he had been watching and make his calculation based on that number and that number alone. I also did something the original video's protagonist did not do, which I want to be precise about because it matters. I did not just call the bank's fraud department and ask for enhanced monitoring. I went into the branch in person. I sat across a desk from Kevin Marsh, the branch manager, and I laid out exactly what I had found, and exactly what I expected to happen, and exactly what I needed the bank to do and not do. I told him the account number. I told him what a fraudulent withdrawal attempt would look like. I told him that if someone entered this branch and attempted to withdraw funds from that account using anything other than my personal presence, I needed a call within 60 seconds, and the funds needed to be frozen immediately. Kevin Marsh was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, Mr. Gallagher, I've been in branch management for 16 years. I've had 2 people come to me with something like this. I said, how did those situations resolve? He said the bank let them down in one of them. I intend to handle the other one differently. I said, I need you to handle this one the same way you wish you had handled that one. He said, understood. 6 weeks later, I walked into that branch on a Tuesday morning to make a routine withdrawal, and Donna went still at her window. I filed the police report that afternoon at the 3rd District Station on Philadelphia Drive. The officer was a young woman named Castillo who wrote everything down efficiently and told me the amount and the documentation I had would move the case to the Financial Crimes Unit quickly. She took the security still Kevin Marsh had printed for me, the forged authorization slip, and the full transaction record. The detective assigned to the case was a man named Gerald Osei, early 50s, unhurried, with the specific quality that the best investigators share. OL. F. T1. F. OL. Which is that they listen to everything before they respond to any of it. He called me the following Friday and asked me to come in and bring my documentation. I brought the spiral notebook with 6 months of dated entries. I brought the printed account access log showing the January login from the Beaver Creek IP address. I brought the credit report showing the loan inquiry. I brought the summary of the 6-week asset restructuring I had completed before November. I brought a timeline I had prepared over the previous 2 days, documenting every financial and estate-related conversation Mitchell and I had had from August 2021 through November 2023, dated, summarized, and cross-referenced against my personal calendar, the same format I had used for insurance fraud cases for 3 decades. Detective Osei read the timeline without speaking. When he finished, he said, "You prepared this yourself." I said, "I was a forensic accountant for 31 years. Documentation is not something I do when I need to. It's something I do as a matter of course," he said. "The January account access. You have the IP trace confirmation from the bank?" I said, "I have the bank's written confirmation of the anomalous login, the timestamp, and the geographic registration of the IP address. I also have the bank's confirmation that the same credentials were used. meaning whoever accessed the account had my username and password. He said, "And you believe your son obtained those credentials during the February visit to your home office?" I said, "The visit was the only opportunity. The access occurred 6 weeks before the visit, which means he used something he observed or recorded during an earlier visit that I did not document. That is a gap in my record, and I want to be precise about it." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Mr. Gallagher, you have the security footage, the forged signature, the account access with geographic correlation, the fraudulent credit inquiry, and a 6-month documented pattern of behavior. This is a substantially complete evidentiary record." I said, "That was the intention." He said, "Why didn't you come to us in February?" I said, "Because in February I had an anomaly. A login from the wrong location at the wrong time. An anomaly is a question. A case is an answer. In November, I had an answer." He said, "We'll open the investigation. I'll be in touch." I called Daniel from the parking lot outside the 3rd District station. He answered before the second ring. I told him everything: the bank, the footage, the blue Christmas jacket, the police report. I told him about the February login and the January credit inquiry, and the 6 weeks I had spent restructuring the estate. He was quiet the way he is quiet when he is fully present and listening, not waiting for his turn, actually listening. When I finished, he said, "Dad, how long have you known?" I said, "I've been documenting since February. I knew what it was by March. I didn't tell you before it was confirmed because I didn't want to ask you to carry something you couldn't act on." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm steady. Steady is what's available right now." He said, "Do you want me to come up?" I said, "Not yet. There'll be a moment when I need you here and I'll tell you when it is." He said, "Okay." Then, after a pause, "I wish Mom had been wrong about him." I said, "Your mother wasn't wrong about who he could have been. She was wrong about who he chose to be. Those are different things." He said, "That's a very dad thing to say." I said, "I only know one way to say things." I drove home to Millbrook Avenue. I sat on the back porch in the November cold, which in Dayton in November is a specific kind of cold that comes with no drama, just a gray, flat persistence. Helen had kept a set of ceramic pots along the back railing, herbs mostly, rosemary and thyme, and one large pot of mint that she claimed was unkillable and that had, in fact, survived 2 winters after her death without my assistance. I sat with my coffee and looked at those pots and thought about the fact that the mint was alive because she had chosen something that did not require much from whoever came after her. I thought about that for a while. Then I went inside and called Daniel back, and we talked for an hour about his team's season and a book I had been reading, and the particular difficulty of the holidays when the people who made the holidays make sense are no longer there to make them make sense. We did not discuss Mitchell, because Mitchell was now in the hands of a financial crimes detective and moving through a process that would proceed on its own schedule. The investigation took 14 weeks. Detective Osei contacted me 4 times. And I was also contacted twice by an assistant prosecutor named Felicity Drake, who was methodical and careful, and who reviewed my documentation with the seriousness it warranted, which was considerable. What the investigation established was this: between August 2021 and November 2023, Mitchell had obtained my banking credentials through a phone-based session in which he had watched me enter them while ostensibly helping me troubleshoot a login issue during a visit in the autumn of 2021 before I had begun formally documenting his behavior, which is the gap I had noted for Detective Osei. He had used those credentials to monitor my account balance at irregular intervals over 2 years. He had submitted the January personal loan application, which had been blocked by my credit freeze. He had forged my signature on the November withdrawal authorization and presented it at the Riverside Drive branch at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning. And Kevin Marsh had done exactly what he had promised he would do. He had frozen the transaction within 4 minutes of Donna flagging it and had called me at 9:02, 38 minutes before I walked through the doors. The digital forensic review of Mitchell's phone, conducted under the search warrant Detective Osei obtained in January, revealed a notes application containing a running record of my Heartland savings balance across 19 months. The most recent entry was time-stamped 7:46 on the morning of the bank visit, 68 minutes before he walked through those doors. It read, "Balance $26,840, going in today. Should be clean by 10. He had been watching. He had tracked the number across 19 months and chosen a Tuesday when I had no standing morning obligations, and no particular reason to go to the bank before noon. He did not know I had scheduled myself to go to the bank on that specific Tuesday 3 weeks earlier. He did not know about Kevin Marsh's promise, or about Donna's training, or about the account at Third Federal on Far Hills Avenue that held everything the Heartland account appeared to hold. He had spent 19 months watching a number on a screen and had driven to a building to take that number and had not known that the building was already ready for him. Now, I want to address something directly, because it came up in conversations I have had since this story became known, and because it is a fair thing to address. People have asked why the bank let the withdrawal get as far as it did at all. Why wasn't I called the moment someone who was not me walked up to that window with a slip on my account? That is a legitimate question. The honest answer is that Donna followed her training exactly as written, which at that time required a manager review only after a transaction had been initiated and flagged by the internal system, not before. The failure was not Donna's. The failure was a protocol gap, and Kevin Marsh knew it. And when I sat across from him 2 months after the investigation closed, he told me directly that the branch had already revised its procedures to require an outbound call to the account holder for any large cash withdrawal requested by a third party, regardless of documentation presented. I told him I appreciated that. I told him that if he had not answered his phone at 9:02 that November morning and handled the next 40 minutes the way he handled them, the outcome would have looked different. He said the outcome was what the protocols were designed for. I said the protocols had been helped considerably by a 64-year-old man who had come into that office 6 weeks earlier and told him exactly what to expect. He almost smiled. Tara, when the investigation reached her through the text record between her and Mitchell, provided a statement characterizing her role as peripheral and expressing that she had believed Mitchell was describing a plan and not intending to execute it. That characterization was reviewed carefully by the prosecutor's office and resulted in no charges. Detective Osei mentioned her statement to me, with the specific economy of language that investigators use when they have a precise opinion about something they are not going to state directly. Mitchell was charged in February with theft, forgery, and identity fraud. The charges were supported by the security footage, the forensic account of the credential use, the phone records, and the notes application entry from 7:46 on the morning of the bank visit. He entered a not guilty plea. The case was scheduled for trial. 3 weeks before trial, he accepted a plea agreement. The terms included full restitution, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent record. It was not the jail time that some people would have wanted for this kind of case. I understand that reaction. What I can tell you is that Felicity Drake told me, when she called to tell me about the plea, that the strength of the evidentiary record I had provided made the prosecution's position strong enough that a plea was the defendant's best available option and that the terms were not lenient. I told her I understood and I thanked her for her work. The restitution was paid in full within 90 days. I deposited it at Third Federal on Far Hills Avenue and noted the date and the amount in my spiral notebook, the same notebook I had started in August of the year Mitchell asked me the first question about my estate. Then I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with it, and sat with the fact that the thing was finished, which requires a different quality of sitting from sitting inside something that is still moving and takes longer than you expect. Daniel drove up from Cincinnati the weekend after the plea. We sat on the back porch in the February cold with our coffees, and he looked at Helen's ceramic pots along the railing and he said, "The mint is still alive." I said, "She said it was unkillable." He said, "She was right." We talked about Mitchell that afternoon for about 20 minutes, which was the appropriate amount. Daniel said he had spent a long time trying to understand how his brother had arrived at the decision to do what he did, and I said I thought the answer was the same answer that almost every financial fraud case resolves to in the end. The person believed the target had stopped paying attention, and that belief had become comfortable enough and convincing enough that the plan had felt real and safe and executable right up until the moment it wasn't. Daniel said, "He should have known you better." I said, "He knew who I was when he was a teenager. He never updated his information." Daniel looked at me. He said, "That's a very accounting way of putting it." I said, "It's the only framework I have." It turns out it applies to most things. The mint came back in the spring, exactly as Helen had said it would. I repotted it in April because it had outgrown the ceramic by another full measure since November, and I put it in a larger pot and set it back in the same spot on the railing. I don't know much about plants. I know that one is unkillable and that Helen knew it would be when she planted it. and that she chose it partly for that reason. She built things for afterward. She built them for the person who would be standing on that porch after she was gone, looking at what she had left and trying to understand what she had intended. I built my documentation the same way. Not for the moment when I would need it, for the moment after, when having it would determine what was possible and what was not. 31 years of professional habit applied in the most personal possible way to the most personal possible situation. Numbers do not lie. The record is the record, and the record was mine. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. If you want to protect yourself the way I protected myself, here is what I will tell you. Freeze your credit today if it is not already frozen. Call your bank and ask specifically about the protocol for third-party withdrawals on your account and write things down. Date everything. The notebook is not a precaution. The notebook is the case. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you are not already here. I'll see you in the next one.